This cold December morning.
There we go. We do look fairly handsome. There you go. That's what we look like. Is that the
Okay.
phone ringing here? I guess it is. Where else would it be? I'll do a quick intro and then we'll just start talking. And it'll be, make sure you talk down into there. Ladies and gentlemen, in my house today, super excited. The one and only Chris Flynn is here. Wow. Amazing to meet you.
Yeah.
I got to tell you before we get going here, back in when I started playing football in 1985, is that when you were at St. Mary's?
No, I was at Champlain.
Champlain. Okay, so right about that time when I was starting football, I remember watching St. Mary's and Chris Flynn on TV, and it gave such a rock star feel to Canadian university football that's what I wanted to do. That's where I wanted to go and play football. I was a receiver at the time, and sort of my biggest dream was to be able to play with Chris Flynn, which never happened. When you're just telling me that it almost happened.
That's right. A 6'6" tight end, that would have you would have came in handy for sure.
And you know what? My game, I had terrible wheels. I couldn't run, but I had great hands. And you get to university, and my thought was, I'm going to. Do you know Jacques Chapdelaine?
Of course, yeah. I don't know him personally, but
amazing guy, and he's the guy. Sort of, I owe a lot to him and his wife to being able to make it to the NFL because of their sort of I call it off-ice training, but their off-the-field training, their speed, agility, balance training, which took me sort of to a new level. So I often think back, if he was only the kind of guy who played with a tight end, because he didn't use a tight end. I remember the first meeting I got to Bishop's University, and we're sitting there in the offensive meeting, and he goes, who are you, boy? He always talked with like a southern drawl, and he's a French Canadian. It's just bizarre. Who are you, boy? You're the tight end? We don't use tight ends. And I remember just sinking down in my chair going, what am I even doing here? This is my dream. But
that's funny. Well, he played in the CFL for quite a few years and was around a lot of American players and coaches, I guess. So
yes, that's
where he got that accent from.
Well, it's very cool, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's still a coach, I believe.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Somewhere
I remember him.
CFL.
I remember him playing the CFL in like the early '80s. He was a receiver,
yes.
BC Lions, and yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
And the Alouettes, I believe he played there for a while too. So Buckingham, Quebec, which is pretty much right across the river here.
That's right. Like it's about 30 minutes from here. Like I come across the ferry, Cumberland Ferry. I live just past Buckingham in Mayo. I'll maybe tell that story, whatever, a little later where I live and all that. But Buckingham is where I grew up. Not far from Orleans at all. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it is east of sort of the Ottawa area.
Like
right?
if just across the Cumberland Ferry, or if you're going like through Ottawa, you'd go Ottawa, Hull, Gatineau, and then Buckingham.
How often do you take the ferry? Do you still
all the
currently
time.
take it? Do you know the guy, the captain of the ship there, Phil McQuaa?
No.
He's a firefighter in the city of Ottawa, and I worked with him for 3 years. Yeah, and he's one of the two guys that drives the ferry back and forth right there.
Well, they have a lot of ferries going, and I've been taking that ferry my whole life.
That's crazy.
And so most of the time, if I come up, I often come up to Orleans for work, and I'll come across on the ferry.
He looks like Bruce Willis, bald guy, always funny. You have to look for him next time. I'm pretty sure he still does it. You know that ferry's on a cable, right? They don't actually drive it. It goes back and forth on a cable underwater.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, because that's how they keep it from freezing too in the wintertime. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to get across. But there's always
But it's not open in the winter.
Yeah, it's open in the winter.
Oh, maybe I'm talking about the wrong thing.
Well, there's one in Cumberland, and then there's one in Rockland too.
Okay.
And the one in Rockland, and I might even be one in Hawkesbury too, but they shut down in the winter. But the one in Cumberland is year round.
Oh, okay.
Cumberland, Masso. Yeah.
Okay. So brothers and sisters?
Yeah, 4 brothers, 1 sister.
Holy jumping. I've never heard that about you.
A lot of J's: Judy, Jamie, Johnny, Jeffrey, Christopher, and Patrick. Chris, but my mom always called us by our full name.
Christopher.
So, yeah, and so I was the second youngest. And from Buckingham, Quebec, it was a small, like maybe 12,000 population, small hockey town. Mm-hmm. And so we all played hockey. And but our uncle Ken Lehman played for the Ottawa Rough Riders in the 60s.
Yeah.
And he was an American, but he married my mom's sister, Aunt Bonnie. And he was like the best defensive player in the CFL. He won that award a few times. He played with Russ Jackson when they were winning the Grey Cups in 68, 69. So he got our family into football big time. So even though we were from a hockey town, as kids, we were into football, at a young age. And like, I've heard your story talking about, football and Miami Dolphins and how you got into it. And as a kid, I remember watching the 1976 Grey Cup.
Yeah.
I was 10 years old. And Tom Clemens to Tony Gabriel for the winning touchdown. And at that time, that's when I really got into football and became a big Rough Rider fan. And I wanted to, after that November 1976, that's when I decided I wanted to play football and play for the Ottawa Rough Riders someday. So that's kind of how my football dream kind of started. And anyone will tell you that knows me, I played football. Like, that's all I wanted to do as a kid. Winter, summer, spring, fall was play football all the time. And I did play other sports, hockey and basketball, and I loved all sports, probably like you did, and with my brothers. But football was definitely my main love for sure.
Wow, 10 years old and it all started there. Your dad, what did he do? What were you doing in Buckingham?
My dad worked at McLaren's in Masso at the power plant there. He worked there for 35 years.
Wow.
So that's kind of how we ended up in Buckingham. And I have a lot of cousins. And I mentioned Mayo. My mother grew up in kind of Big Lake, Mayo area. And it's kind of a long story, but my brother Jamie, who owns and operates Flynn Log Homes, he built me a log home 10 years ago right on Long Lake. So that's where I live, and it's a beautiful spot. It's a little bit past Buckingham, but it's about 45 minutes from Ottawa.
I've seen pictures on Facebook. It looks like an amazing place. And you built a rink out on the water there?
Yes, I'm actually going to do that on Friday. Like, it's frozen. Like, it's usually I don't get the rink going till January, but it's been so cold, as you know. That I think there's already 6 or 7 inches of ice in our little bay. So I build a little rink in the middle of the bay. And just quick on my family, I have my daughter Chelsea. She lives in Austin, Texas.
Oh, wow.
But she's 26 and she lives there, and she's coming home at Christmas time. And it's hard, I don't see her as much as I'd like to. But
what's she doing there?
She works for Dell Computers.
Okay.
She met a guy there a few years ago, and she really liked it there, and so she decided to stay there. So I hope to go visit her again in the spring. And so I have my daughter Chelsea. Then I have my son. A little surprise a few years ago. I have a son Nate. He'll be 4 next month. So I thought of thinking my hockey rink. I didn't get it going last winter, but I'll have to get it going again because Nate's at that age. He's still pretty young, but. Get him to start learning how to skate. So,
I made a rink for 12 years in my front lawn or back lawn. Here there's a front lawn, and it was a labor of love, right? It's a lot of effort, a lot of work, but they get so much out of it. Like after school every day, they'd be out there,
absolutely,
on the rink, and it's a great thing. It's a great Canadian thing for sure.
It's a lot of work, and doing it on a lake, it's even harder.
It seems dangerous.
No, it's not it's not on a river, so it's on a lake. So it'll get 20 inches of ice and. It's not it's not a river could maybe be dangerous, but not on the lake. We don't really get on there till it's even you can walk on 2 or 3 inches of ice, but we wait till it gets a lot thicker than that before we.
And you have a bar. What's the shenanigans? What's the story there? I need to know the story. I see it posted all the time on Facebook.
A lot of people my friends who maybe don't live around this area think I actually own a bar. But in my basement of my house, I actually fixed it up like almost looks like a real little sports pub. And because of where I live on Long Lake, it's a real community. Like we have the Long Lake Regatta every summer. It's been going on for 65 years where there's like hundreds of people go to it. So it's not your usual area where I live. It's a real community where everyone kind of hangs out together because it's on a lake. So I host sporting events. I used to do a lot more things like Halloween parties and St. Patrick's Day stuff like that. So I have, I'll have hockey games on a Saturday. Then everyone will come into my one of my cousins started calling it Shenanigans for the fun of it.
It's a great name.
There's a lot of shenanigans going on there. So it's not an actual bar, but it's just my basement bar that looks like a bar, and all the local gang, we hang out there and, watch football and hockey and stuff like that.
That's amazing.
Pretty regularly. Yeah.
For people who might not be, familiar to Chris Flynn and who listen to this podcast, which is, just lots of people who don't follow football. It's unprecedented what you did to the game of football, especially, Canadian college football. 3 Hec Crighton Trophies, which is the most outstanding player of the year award, which nobody's ever done before or since, right? A Canadian Football Hall of Fame as a university football player.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, they kind of the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. I thought it was the CFL Hall of Fame, but
Yeah.
it's the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. And in 2011, they kind of opened two new categories. One was to recognize not just professional players, but to recognize, college players who did really well at the college level. So they want to start inducting players in Canada who did well at the college level. And I was the first one to be inducted in 2011 based on my college football.
The whole award was for you, right? Like, I mean, who's getting who? They're like, how do we get Chris Flynn? He deserves to be here. His impact on this game is enormous. This is the Chris Flynn category, right?
Yeah.
People might not understand the CFL and how they don't. Maybe this isn't what this conversation is about, but they don't necessarily give Canadian quarterbacks an opportunity, right? Every position sort of has a nationality to it, and quarterback, unfortunately, isn't one for some reason or another, right? I mean, if you were an offensive lineman, you would have, played 25 years in the CFL, right? I mean, it would have been the CFL Chris Flynn Offensive Lineman Award, but to receive that and to change the game in that way and to make the CFL or the Canadian Football Hall of Fame sort of create an award is an amazing accomplishment.
It was, and as I said, I was shocked like when I got the call for that. And just to add to the story, the other category that they created that same year just by coincidence was to induct professional athletes or football players that maybe got looked over, that had played 30 or 40 years ago and maybe deserved to be in the Hall of Fame but were not inducted. And just by total coincidence, the player they decided to induct, in that category was my uncle Kenny Lehman, because he had won the Shenley Award. He had been a top player in the 60s, but maybe it was so long ago that they overlooked him. So just by coincidence, so me and Kenny both found out we were being inducted. I forget who the commissioner was at the time that called both of us. And when he called Kenny and he told him who the other inductees were, Kenny's like, Chris Flynn, that's my nephew. And the same thing with me. I said, Ken Lehman, that's my uncle. And even the CFL or the Canadian Football Hall of Fame didn't even know that we were uncle and nephew. So it was quite a story. So we both played football. I played a very short stint for the Ottawa Rough Riders, but we both played whatever it was, 20, 30 years apart. But we both got inducted into Canadian Football Hall of Fame totally by coincidence at the same time in two new categories, college players and overlooked players that were players that maybe have been overlooked once upon a time. So we both went to Calgary. That's where it was in 2011. And we both got inducted at the same time.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Wow.
So Ken Lehman, number 41, Ottawa Rough Riders.
Wow. Where's he living now?
They live in Ottawa, and they have a cottage, Bonnie and Kenny, they have a cottage on Big Lake, which is just past where I live on Long Lake.
Oh, wow.
So their cottage is like 5 minutes past my place.
That's unbelievable. That's an incredible story, man.
Yeah.
Wow. So 10 years old, you're watching the Grey Cup, Tony Gabriel, touchdown.
Tom Clemens,
Tom Clemens, Tony Gabriel.
Yeah.
Where does it go from there? Is there a place to play football in Buckingham?
Yeah, so no, in Buckingham, kind of like you, I didn't start playing football till high school. So we played football for fun, and Philman Wright was the big high school powerhouse in Quebec. Dave Fisher, legendary coach, and there was kids from Buckingham that had gone to Philman Wright to play football too. So I wanted to play for Philman Wright. People have heard me say this before. They were like, back then, they were like the Dallas Cowboys in your mind as a kid, like to play for Philman. So I went to Philman Wright. Unfortunately, when I got there, I went to high school in grade 8 at Our Lady of Victory in Buckingham. So there's no football. So in grade 9, I went to Philman Wright. But just as I got there, they cut the junior team. So I had to try out for the senior team. So in grade 9, I made the team, but in my first year, but I didn't play very much. I played maybe 10 or 15 plays. But then the next year, I ended up being the starting quarterback and played starting quarterback for a few years at Philman. We won the Quebec Provincial Championships while I was there. They even moved us into the Ottawa League for 1 year, and we won. We were predicted by the Ottawa Citizen to finish in last place against all these strong Ottawa teams, but we ended up winning the whole thing. We beat J.S. Woodsworth in the final. That was 1984, and during my time there, we only lost one game. We lost a regular season game to Laurentian, and they were a really good team. We ended up beating them in the playoffs and beating them in a close game in the playoffs in the semifinals. Yeah. But and then from there, a bunch of us from Philman Wright, we went on a recruiting trip to Champlain College.
Yep.
well, you're familiar with, and Tony Adana, who I'm sure you know.
Yeah, very well, for sure.
He took us down a recruiting trip, and we just loved it. And again, Champlain was a powerhouse team too, although they had lost in the Bowl d'Or the previous few years, so they were trying to get over the hump. And I went there, and I just loved it. There was like a couple of my teammates, Mike Carno, Dan Rich, and Matt Nealon, all from Film and Write as well. And so we
Is that right? Wow. Did they all go there because
we all
going together? Or?
Yeah, well, four Film and Write players went to St. George de Beauce.
Okay.
And four of us went to Film and Write. So 8 of us from Film and Write four of us went to Champlain.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. And so we just, Tony recruited us, and we went down, and we had, like I said, we had a pretty good high school team. So 8 of us went to CJEP, 4 to St. George, 4 to Champlain. And we ended up meeting St. George in the Bowl d'Or, and we beat them in the finals to win it. So in '86, you may or may not have heard this before, but in '86, I ended up getting a full scholarship to Boise State, and after 1 year at Champlain. So Boise State, it wasn't the program it is today. Like, it's very well known today. They're in the top 25 all the time. At that time, they were 1AA, and I for some reason took like 5 different flights to get to Boise. I felt like I was in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. It was their first year with the light blue artificial turf.
Yeah. Long way from Buckingham.
Yes. So I did well in training camp, but at the end of training camp, they told me I was going to redshirt, which is pretty common, as you know. But I didn't know about redshirting. I thought I was as good as the other quarterbacks, and I had no patience back then. So I didn't want to. I didn't want to sit around, so I talked to the registrar, talked to Tony, and I asked if there was a chance that I could come back. It was just, I did the whole training camp, but school hadn't started yet. One of the things too, maybe that, not mistake, but instead of staying in the dorm with the other rookies, I ended up staying at this Canadian guy's house who had played at Boise a few years before. The problem with that was I was always by myself. I didn't, I probably, if I had stayed at the dorm with the other rookies, maybe I would have stayed. But I was always by myself at my Canadian friend's place, so maybe that was a factor too. But at the last second, I decided to, with Tony's help, to come back to Champlain just before school started. So I left Boise and came back to Champlain for my second year, and we ended up winning the Bowl d'Or again in '86. And then that winter, there was definitely some different schools that I could have maybe went to, but I decided, I guess, to kind of by default to go to Bishop's. And Bruce Coulter was the coach, but he was leaving, so that was a factor. Like, if he had stayed, I might have stayed. Yeah, I might have stayed there too. And I liked Ian Breck, but I didn't. He was a defensive coach, and he wasn't a head coach there, so I didn't know him as well. But I definitely knew all about Bruce. But he was literally retiring at that same time that I decided to go to Bishop's. And I don't know, you were in Lennoxville. Just being from Buckingham, 2 years in Lennoxville, I said, do I really want to be 6 or 7 years in Lennoxville? Like, if you're from Toronto and Montreal, going to Lennoxville is pretty cool. But from a small town, I wasn't sure. I thought maybe I wanted to go. And Tony Harris, who you've had on this.
Yes, he drew that picture right there.
Yes, I know. I watched the podcast. It was great.
And that painting right there.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So Tony was still there. He had another year left. He was like a 2-time All-Canadian. And from my Boise State experience, I didn't have much patience back then. I didn't really want to back up for a year. I wanted to play right away. But I still had, in January, February, decided to go to Bishop's. But I was at home on my March break in Buckingham, bored, doing nothing. And Larry Utek, he had called me a few times earlier in the year, and I said no, I wasn't interested. I didn't know much about St. Mary's or Halifax, but I was on my March break. He asked me to come down on a recruiting trip, so I decided to go down on a recruiting trip. I really had no interest in going. I just was bored. I thought I'd go down, and I just loved Halifax. They just built their new sports complex there, the Tower. It wasn't even open yet. They had it was an older stadium, but it was a nice stadium with artificial turf. And again, Halifax, the city was great. And I just loved it. And I guess another factor, like St. Mary's hadn't had a winning season in 13 years before I got there. They hadn't been in the playoffs in 13 years. When I went to Film and Wright, when I went to Champlain, they were powerhouses before I got there. But St. Mary's, I think, were ranked like 23rd out of 23 teams at that time. Like, yeah, they had gone through definitely a rough period for over a decade. And I don't know what it was, but I just wanted that challenge. As a quarterback, you play a position where, you know, you can make a difference at quarterback.
Yes.
So I just decided, you know, I want to come here. I want to go to St. Mary's. And I even took a job there in the summer just so I wouldn't change my mind and like, you know, go somewhere else. So that's kind of my quick story on how I ended up going to St. Mary's.
That's great. So at this point, it's 10 years old. We haven't even got to university yet. You haven't lost many football games. You're winning like almost every game you're out there. What can you attribute your success in football to? Why are you such a good quarterback?
It helped going to, I mean, Film and Wright and Champlain were pretty good teams. And yeah, I lost as a starter, I think, one game at Film and one at Champlain and won all our playoff games. But I played on some good teams. But I think that's a tough question to ask me.
You can't just put yourself, like, I couldn't have gotten in that spot, a great program, and become a great quarter. I just couldn't have, right? That's not who I ever was, right? I was a receiver, and, you know what I mean? Like, what did you do before that to step in there? I know your first year in high school you didn't start, that's right. But then your second year you're starting quarterback, which is unheard of for a team that's made up of, you know, could be up to 18, 19-year-olds, right? And here you are, 14 or 15 as a starting quarterback, and you say that position is very important in the game of football, right? That's a make or break position, and here you step in, and you can up here in your head lead this team to winning games. Like there's something going on. There's a thought process. There's a confidence. It's
funny. Like the first year I got there, I was like, I'm bigger, chubbier guy now, but back then I was pretty skinny in grade 9. I was younger. Yeah. I was like one of the smallest guys on the team. And at first I tried out for receiver, and they had a whole bunch of receivers, but I noticed they only had 2 quarterbacks. So I asked the coach if I could try out for quarterback, and he's like, "Yeah, sure, you can try out for quarterback." He didn't know who I was, and again that first year, the second string quarterback ended up quitting. So by default, I moved up to second string, but again, didn't play much in practice. I'm not the type of guy that would ever impress anyone in practice throughout all my career. Not that I was bad in practice, but as you know, you don't scramble around and make things happen in practice. In practice, you just run the plays. But in the spring camp, for some reason, Coach Fisher, the starting quarterback, he actually moved him to fullback, which that never happens, but he was a really good athlete, so he moved him to fullback, and in spring camp, he made me the starting quarterback. I'm not sure why he did that. I think he just felt like I was more into it than Brad Grant, the quarterback, was. Maybe he didn't really enjoy playing quarterback. So he basically moved him to fullback, and he was like an all-star fullback, and he moved me to quarterback, I swear by default, maybe because there was no other quarterbacks, even though this team was really strong. Not everyone wants to play quarterback in high school, even though it's whatever glamorous position. It's not for everyone. So maybe the time,
because it's hard, right? Like, it's a hard position.
That's it. So that fall, I remember running the plays. We had a running team my first year starting, so I was throwing it, but I remember one of the first times, I'm sure you've seen my highlight films or whatever, one of the first times I rolled out and the guy wasn't open, and I reversed field, and I went all the way around reverse field, and I found a guy wide open. I threw it to him for a touchdown. And Coach Fisher was kind of in shock. Like, he kind of looked at me, and because I threw a touchdown, he didn't say anything. I swear, if that play wouldn't have worked, if I threw a pick off or got sacked for 40 yards, who knows, I may never have done that again. But it worked on that play. I'll never forget. It was the first time I don't even know what made me think to do it. Everyone was chasing me, and I reversed field, and it worked. And I'll say that it didn't always work in the future. Sometimes I got sacked for 40 yards, but the first time I ever tried it, it worked. I threw a touchdown. And then my scrambling days kind of started.
Dude, I just honestly just got goosebumps up the back, man. You know, those little moments in life where everything can pivot, and you know, and it worked out, and you know, you made a lifetime of it. Really, you know, you got into the Canadian Football Hall of Fame because of that, because of your playmaking ability and your ability to sort of be unconventional. You know, most guys, when they first start off, they're told, stay in the pocket, don't leave the pocket. And when you do those big looping things, the next thing you're usually sitting on the bench, right?
That could have happened. If I would have got sacked, he might have said, you know, don't do that again, or don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But because it worked, he kind of like, and yeah, it's not something that, I remember the first time I saw someone else do that was Doug Flutie.
Yes. Very similar.
Yeah, I remember seeing him do that, including, I think, BC Lions was his first team in 89 or 90. And I was like, wow. Not to compare myself to him, but I remember saying, "Wow, I do that." Like that's first person I saw do that was Doug Flutie.
If there's anyone that can be compared to you or to Doug Flutie, I think it's you and him.
That was the style like that he played was the style that I played, and I hadn't seen him do it till again in my university days. I think even though he played college, I didn't really remember watching him at Boston College, but I remember his first few years in the CFL.
Right. Yeah, that Hail Mary play.
For sure against
was
Miami.
The first sort of his, what made everybody take notice of this guy, right? I mean, he's a little guy too, and just his ability to make a play, and he did that in Canada. I can remember thinking if I ever get a chance to play with Doug Flutie, and that's actually why, the long story, but why I ended up going to the CFL at the point I did, because I was supposed to be traded to the Toronto Argonauts where Doug Flutie was, and that never really happened. My dad made a phone call that kind of ruined the deal, and the Argos. I went to the BC Lions, and the Argos won the Grey Cup that year. But I think that was '97. I know. It was all in love. My dad didn't understand what was happening. He wasn't my agent or anything. He just knew I was playing in the NFL, and he couldn't turn on the TV and see me play because I was on the bench or on the practice roster, whatever it was at the time. And so he thought things weren't going well. So I told him, hey, I may play in the CFL, because he lived in Vancouver, and I was like, maybe I'll get a chance to see or whatever. And he thought, oh, here's my opportunity. He opened up the phone book, found the BC Lions phone number, called it. Adam Rita picked up the phone and said, hey, my son Mark wants to come play for you. I had already been drafted in the first round by the BC Lions, and they were just in the process of trading my rights to the Toronto Argonauts, assuming I would never go play in the CFL. And here my dad made the announcement that I was about to go play. Yeah, and then my agent flipped out, and it was a big scene at the time, but, you can't go back.
So you were that close to going to Toronto, and Noah Cantor, my buddy, he was there, so you ended up playing with him eventually?
Yes, in BC. So I was in 2017. I was sitting on the couch watching, and they had a documentary about the '97 Argos, and it only clued into me, that's the team I was supposed to be on, and here they are 20 years later making a documentary about that team. Life's funny, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. When Flutie was there, I remember those couple of years, 96, 97. Don Matthews was the coach.
That's right. Yeah.
And Pinball, I think, was there.
Yep. Yeah. For sure. Great team, great organization. It was Eric Tillman who was sort of the one bringing me in. He had drafted me in Vancouver and was trying to get me to play right tackle there. And they'd made a deal to trade their right tackle. And I think he was an American guy, so they were bringing in a Canadian and the whole bit. And that fell through. And I guess my life has more to offer than just a Grey Cup. That's what I try and justify it with sometimes.
So how many years were you with BC?
3 years.
3 years?
Yeah. I got big injuries every year.
Yeah.
When I came to the CFL, I was more of an athletic sort of offensive lineman, so they had me playing special teams quite a bit. And being an offensive lineman in CIAU, which is Canadian football, I didn't play those special teams a lot, so I didn't really know what I was doing. And here I thought, every time I was on a punt team, or I'm going to make the tackle, I'd run down the field, and I'm like, no one's blocking me. And the next thing I know, I'm waking up, I've been knocked out by someone who knew what they were doing, with a broken shoulder,
Especially playing at the pro level and having to play special teams for the first time.
I thought I was about to tackle. It was Friday Night Football. I was like, I'm about to smoke Gizmo Williams here. And there he was, 10 meters from me. I'm starting to break down, and next thing you know, this guy, who was actually the special teams player. If in the CFL, you're running downfield to tackle somebody and you think you're unblocked, you're about to get lit up, right? Those are the guys who know how to do it, right?
Yeah, some special team Ace has been doing it for 10 years.
Yes, he's going, look at this guy. He, and it was a guy, I forget his name too. He was special teams player of the year that year, and he'd watched film and the whole bit. And it was, I'd only been on because the previous week Louis Passaglia had two punts blocked. And it had been years since he'd had one punt block. So Adam Reeder was like, all right, we'll get Hatfield. He's a big, aggressive guy to stand beside Louis and just hammer anybody who comes through. And that's was my job. And nobody came through. And I'm like, no one's even blocking me. They don't
Then
know.
you had to run down
Then
and tackle
I was
someone.
running downfield. I see Gizmo. And I'm like, I got him. He disappeared because he's one of the greatest of all time. And next thing you know, I'm flying sideways through the air. And my shoulder popped. I actually ended up playing the whole game at right tackle with one arm. I didn't even realize it. You look at the film afterwards, and I only had one hand up because my other shoulder didn't even work.
It's amazing the adrenaline you can have sometimes to finish a game, and then the next day, you can't even lift up that shoulder.
End of the game, I went to take my pads off. I couldn't get the shoulder up. They had to cut my jersey off and everything, and I had surgery the next day.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. It's this shoulder here. Look at that scar.
Yeah, I got one over here.
Oh yeah, same similar thing.
A couple of screws.
Players. Yeah, I got those for sure. I was a teacher at Philemon Wright.
You were?
Yeah, for like one semester. I met a guy, and he was the vice principal, and he was like, what are you doing? Well, I'm a retired football player. And he goes, why don't you come and be a substitute teacher? And I went in there, and a substitute teacher doesn't give a lick about anything. So all the kids liked me and everything, and they had an opening, and they hired me to teach some grade 9 math and moral education.
I did some substitute teaching at Philemon as well.
Yeah.
Just for like a day. I didn't have my teacher's college, but I would do a day here and there because I was helping out coaching. So I would do some substitute teaching. But what year was
that? Would have been 2001.
Wow.
Yeah.
2001. That's cool. I did not know that.
Yeah.
No. Did they? I know there was a few years that they didn't actually have football, and it might have even been during that time.
I'm pretty sure they did. I helped
Did
them.
they?
Yeah, because we had some practices in the gym that winter, and I helped out there a little bit.
Okay. Do you remember who the head coach was?
It was the guy who'd been there a long time.
Like Kurt Garbett or
Kurt
Jimmy
was
Howard?
definitely there. Yeah, Kurt was definitely there.
So I played with Kurt. Kurt was there was. Remember I mentioned 4 guys went to St. George.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, Kurt Garbett, Jimmy Howard. Now I'm on the Kurt Garbett, Jimmy Howard, Mo Lepage. I'm trying to think of the 4th guy. Might have been Darren Knight, but 4 went to St. George, and Kirk was one of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he ended up being he's a referee now these days.
Oh, okay.
But,
yeah, I know him well. He was there for sure.
Okay. Cool.
And the head coach there was a guy who'd been the gym teacher for many years. I can't think of his name.
Matt Orlando.
That doesn't ring a bell.
No. Oh, Mr. Quapis. Jerry Quapis,
I think
guy.
Jerry. Yeah, Jerry. That's what it was.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, he was there even when I was there. Yeah, for sure.
He took it very serious for sure. Yeah, he was totally into it. Nice guy.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
I believe he retired like that year or the year after, but he'd been there a while for sure.
Yeah.
So we go to St. Mary's, and as a rookie, what's the plan heading in? You're on the team. The team has his last place in the CIU.
Yeah. So my first year, I ended up starting most of the first few games, but when things weren't going well, I got pulled a few times, which that never happened to me before. But it's hard when you're a first year player in university. The third year guy was a veteran, so it's tough to beat out. It's tough to start in your first year university for sure. Even for me, with all the hype that surrounded me going there, it still took half the season before I was the full-time starter. I wasn't getting pulled after throwing a pick off, whatever. But my first year was tough. We weren't that strong. We had a pretty good defense, pretty good offensive line, but we weren't that strong at the skilled position. A couple of skilled guys we did have got hurt. So my first year was a tough season, but we actually managed to finish first place.
First place in the conference.
In the conference,
okay.
And we played a really good Acadia team. They had a really good defense. We ended up beating them in the playoffs, and then we ended up playing the McGill Redmen, and they ended up being like a really good team. They sent a bunch of guys to the CFL, including Mike Souls, and they upset Bishops this is in '87 when Tony Harris and Leroy Boone, all the guys. Bishops were like maybe one of the top ranked teams in Canada. McGill upset them. Turns out McGill wasn't exactly some upstart team. They beat us in the last play of the game. Chuck Pettipaw, my old teammate from Champlain, who I was trying to get to come to St. Mary's, he went to McGill, and he kicked a 45-yard field goal in the last play of the game to beat us 30-29. And then they killed UBC in the Vanier Cup like 62-11.
Wow.
So this McGill team kind of came out of nowhere. There was a lot of hype on Bishops, but McGill ended up being a really good team, and so they won it in my first year. And then in '88, then we had some good recruits. My buddy Matt Nealon, who was a star receiver at Philman Wright and at Champlain, so I got him to come in my second year. So then we had some good receivers. We didn't have a great running game still, but we had a good receiving core, 4 all-star receivers. So we went 10-0 that year. We met Bishops in the Atlantic Bowl. We beat them like 44-10, but it was one of those games where they had I think they had like 7 turnovers. It was just, they had a Silvio Martel who was only a rookie. So we won that game. But during that game, unfortunately, in the second quarter, I was a skinny guy, but I never got hurt. I just seemed to know how to take a hit or avoid a hit. But in that game, Brian Morley got me from behind. He tackled me from behind, and at the same time, Derek Schumann hit me from the front.
Yes. And
it was so bad, I managed to... all my years, I never got walked off by a trainer. I never wanted the other team to know I got hurt. So even that play, I kind of stumbled off to the sideline. I missed about 10 minutes of the game. I ended up getting a hairline fracture and a severe concussion, but I managed to talk myself back into the game. So I missed about 10 minutes. I remember the whole game. I could not see the scoreboard. I didn't know how much time was left. I kept asking people like how much time was left because my vision was so bad. We won that game, and that night should have been like a crazy night in Halifax. But I remember going out around 7, and by 8 o'clock at night, I had to come home. I had such bad headaches. So I missed practice that week. I did some CAT scans and stuff, but I still, I should have never been allowed back in that game. But back then, that was different from today. Today I would have not been allowed, but back then I got back in. So I missed practice. So the Vanier Cup's coming up. I missed practice during the week. I had to wear, I remember on the plane, I started tearing up because of the pain from whatever the pressure. I had to wear sunglasses during the week because of the lights, but I still thought, and everyone still thought I was playing. Thursday afternoon, I had practice. I go to what I thought was a checkup doctor's appointment after practice, and they kind of tricked me. They made me think it was just a checkup, so I was very truthful with the doctor. I told him, that's bothering me, this is bothering me, that's bothering me. So after the appointment's over, he goes, you can't play in the Vanier Cup. I'm like, what? I was furious. I felt like they tricked me, but obviously they were just looking out for me. But Coach Utek's like, Chris, no, the school's not going to let you play. My eye was full of blood. I had a black eye. When do you get a black eye with a football helmet on? Usually that's how bad the hit was. So Thursday night at 6 o'clock, I find out I'm not playing in the Vanier Cup. 2 hours later, I'm going up and I'm receiving my first Hec Crighton Trophy. So I found out 2 hours before the Hec Crighton ceremony that they weren't letting me play. So when I received my trophy, I announced at the same time I would not be playing in the Vanier Cup. So unfortunately, we lost the Vanier Cup. We got beat by Calgary, and that was my second year. I won't go on too long about my St. Mary's, but my third year, we had a really senior team. We're all 4th and 5th year guys on the team, but the problem was my third year, we didn't have. My first couple of years, we had pretty good competition in our conference. So Acadia was really good. They had an outstanding defense, maybe the best defense I played against. But in my third year, all the other schools were rebuilding. Mount Allison, Acadia, and St. FX, they were all rebuilding, and we were a very senior team. So that year, we had no competition in the regular season. I didn't even play in the fourth quarter the whole year. So we come up our conference championship game, we beat Acadia 46-2, but my 2 inside receivers get hurt, Bill Scollard and Brian Smith. And I had 2 good wide receivers, but my 2 inside guys got hurt. They tried to play in the Atlantic Bowl, but they really weren't able to. And we ended up playing this, maybe the best team I ever played against, the 89 Western Mustangs, who had Dwayne Ford at fullback. They had Sapangis at running back. Probably know those names. And
This is when I started watching football, man. These
yeah,
few years, I know all these guys. I know all these events. I remember all of
yeah.
this. Yeah, really
So
well.
so they were really good, and we were not ready. We were not ready for them.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure. We were like ranked number one. So we're playing Western, and they got up way up on us by like 20 points. We caught up. We were a short kickoff from maybe winning the game, but we ended up losing to them 38-33. They killed Saskatchewan in the Vanier Cup. I think they won like 35-10. So my fourth year, we lose most of our seniors, but we had a running back, Sean Monge, who it was his first year starting full time. It was the first year I had a really good running game. And our defense, we lost a lot of guys, but we had a really young, strong defense. So that year we actually lost in the regular season. We had some good competition within our conference. So we ended up playing Western in the Atlantic Bowl again. Unfortunately, the week before, I throw an interception, and I'm tackling the guy, and I severely, whatever, sprained my shoulder. I didn't practice all week. Didn't even practice before the morning of the game. They gave me whatever cortisone shot here and there, and I was able to actually lift my arm up. I could actually throw the ball about 25 yards, so I was able to play in the game. It was a really good game, back and forth. I think Western was coming into the game ranked number one. They were kind of like the Alabama of the States. They had won like 20 games in a row or something like that. Like they were like or today's Western or today's Laval. They were that strong. So it was a back and forth game. And at the very end of the game, we're down by 5, and we end up marching down and scoring a touchdown with like 8 seconds left in the game to upset Western. So we ended up playing in that. We were down 14-0 that game. We came back. So we won the game. We went to the Vanier Cup. I missed practice most of that week, but I practiced, I think, at the end of the week. So we're playing Saskatchewan, who are in the Vanier Cup again for the second time, and they were a really strong team. They had it seemed like they're all 25 years old.
They were men. They were definitely men, those guys.
They were all 4th and 5th year guys, and they had some guys that went on, Dan Farthing, that went on to the CFL too. So they were like, their defense especially was very strong. So we got down 14-0 against them right away too. There was lots of turnovers by both teams. It was
So this is 1990?
1990.
Okay, so
your
this is my first year, yes.
You guys actually played against Saskatchewan.
And got smoked.
And you got smoked.
I can remember Ian Breck saying, I knew we lost the game beforehand when all the players from Saskatchewan showed up and they had children. Like these were men who had already played in another junior football and then decided, hey, let's all go to university for a
that's
year.
true. I knew about that, but forgot about it during our conversation. Now, you played against them at McGill Stadium.
Yeah, that's right. I was there. I didn't play. I was, like you said, red-shirted. I was actually injured. I broke my ankle a week before training camp. It's in my story, actually. I don't know if you heard that part of it. I was going to Bishop's and I broke my ankle playing basketball. And, so I never played.
There was a little bit of controversy for you guys in that game, or maybe Bishop's was too nice. Like you guys should have played them in Lennoxville in the mud.
That's right. Yeah, the field was destroyed.
And you would have had it, that would have given you a better chance to win, because you guys were kind of more of maybe a running team too.
That's right. I remember that.
But instead, you played them at McGill on a decent field, and they were.
That's a great memory to remember that. Wow.
Well, I unfortunately, I wish I remember a lot of other things, but I can remember scores and everything. So I remember you played them, and partly why I remember because I watched the game film, because we had to play them the next week. So we played them in the Vanier Cup. We got down 14-0 right away. We caught up. We ended up again, same as the Westford game, a minute left in the game with a chance to win, down by 3 points. We didn't really have much of a kicking game, I don't think. So it was all about getting a touchdown. Yeah. We were like 3rd and 10. I hit Matt Nealon for a first down with 25 seconds left around the 35-yard line. Next play, I threw it down the sideline, overthrew him by a few inches, unfortunately. And then the next play, there was a little bit of miscommunication or whatever, but I rolled out, I stopped, and I got nailed from behind, fumbled the ball, and they recovered, so we ended up losing 24-21. And so that was my 4th year. I won the Hec Crighton. That was my third Hec Crighton earlier in that week. And that was my 4th year, and I was going to come back for my 5th year. As it turns out, many many seasons after I left, I've seen a lot of fifth-year quarterbacks finally win the Vanier Cup in their fifth year.
Yeah.
But I didn't. A whole other story. The Montreal Machine.
Yep.
Do you remember those?
Of course, yeah.
So that was the new World League of American Football. It was kind of like a farm league for the NFL. There was a lot of young players and a lot of older NFL guys that were maybe wanted to chance to play.
It was an
again.
exciting time for sure to have a team like that.
So there was teams in the States,
Yeah.
and there was teams in Barcelona, London, Frankfurt, and then the Montreal Machine. So in January, Coach Jacques Dussault, who I played against in CEGEP University, he was the head coach. And he was like, Chris, you got to come and you got to come. Like I was like the first guy he signed up, I think, for the Montreal Machine. So I bypassed my fifth year to go to St. Mary's to play for the Montreal Machine, and I didn't play. I think I got in like 3 or 4 plays my first year. My second year, they switched me to receiver. I actually surprised myself. I did pretty well at receiver, but I was a backup.
Yeah.
Maybe caught 1 or 2 passes a game, sort of thing, and then end up going. Played 2 years with the Montreal Machine, and then all the North American teams folded. They just had European teams, and it became NFL Europe, which existed actually until for a good 10 or 15 years. And
I got drafted by somebody, I forget who. The Scottish Claymores.
Really?
Yeah, I never ended up going. I ended up going to BC Lions. It was that year.
Okay.
It's if you weren't a starter or you were on the practice roster for an NFL team, they expected you to go to NFL Europe, which is a long season, right? Like you're playing NFL and then you go there, and then like it was too much.
It's like a spring league too.
Yep.
Like, yeah. Okay.
It wasn't long, but it was in 8 weeks or something.
It was long if you were playing both.
That's right.
Yeah. Then it was like year round. Yeah, for sure.
For football, where you need half a year to recover. So before we go on through there, I want to know about your concussion, because I retired because of a really bad concussion. And so when you talked about that, it brought back all those memories of sunglasses and, dark rooms.
Yours was,
It's terrible. It was terrible. Yeah, I was on special teams again, and it was actually Noah Cantor and I were on the kickoff return team, and we would do that thing like where I got smoked years before, where you pretend you're not blocking somebody, and then you just at the last second turn into him and smoked. And one time we smoked Mike O'Shea so hard, so we thought things were going really good, or I did anyways. This is awesome. Nobody knows what's happening. And then we played a guy, Wayne Weathers, in Winnipeg. And we were doing that same thing. And Wayne Weathers, it was a special teams player of the year that year, too. A different guy.
So he knew what he was doing.
He knew what he was doing. He'd watch the film. Look at these 2 dopey guys here. I think they're going to light me up. And we did that. Here we go. He beeline straight for me. Head-to-head collision. I blacked out on the field. I didn't even know till I watched the film afterwards. But I stumbled over the sidelines, and the ball went down. Everyone was still watching the ball. Here I am, passed out on the sidelines, so nobody saw me, and I got back up and I played the rest of the game like that too, in and out of consciousness. Wow. And I only ever played one game. It was the Western Final that year after that, and it was a lot of dark rooms, a lot of trying to figure out how to cope with, how to get this better, and it was a terrible, terrible experience, and it lasted for years. Only probably 5 years later did I stop having effects of it, and I couldn't even watch football because the banging on TV was hurting my head.
Wow.
Yeah, it was.
We probably had, unfortunately, we both probably had more than that. More than one concussion, unfortunately, and once. Yeah, I remember a few other ones. That was definitely the worst one.
Yeah.
And mine, I wasn't allowed to play any sports all winter. Like, we played pickup hockey and stuff in basketball. I wasn't allowed to play anything for several months. I think in the spring or whatever, February, March, I was allowed to start playing other sports. You always wonder how bad it was or how it affected us. And even today, you forget stuff. You wonder how bad it is when you go into the kitchen and go, what am I in here for? Oh, yeah, okay, gotta get this. So do you find it bothers you a little bit sometimes?
I don't know. And
it's hard to tell.
That's the question, right? Yeah, because, late 40s, I'm definitely a different person. And people say that, from a traumatic head injury, you become a different person. And I don't know if we've talked about this, but I do a lot of comedy now.
Yeah.
And whereas before that, I don't think I would have done that. It just seems to be a different sort of personality that emerged from that head injury.
Wow.
And it's not like it's a bad thing. It's more of I have a lot of confidence. I have an ability just to stand in a room full of people and just talk. And that before, I don't think I had. People are always like, aren't you nervous getting up there? I don't have that switch. I don't have that, I'm nervous.
I'm amazed. I like joking around. I'm I like the one-liners and that, but to get up and stand up in front of people,
Right.
that's how did you?
How did that start?
Yeah,
Well, it started because, well, you've heard my story. So I started motivational speaking, and I did that for 8 years. And I have different versions of it, a 45-minute version or an hour version or a 10-minute, 15-minute version, which is probably similar to the story that you heard. And a lot of it, there's jokes in it and stuff. And I did it one night, and there's a guy who produces comedy nights, and he came up to me afterward and said, have you ever wanted to do stand-up comedy? I'm like, yeah, all the time. But, I just don't even know what to do. He goes, you just did. Right? I got up there, I told a heartfelt story with jokes in it, made people laugh, made people cry. And he goes, that's comedy, and do you want to come and try it out? And I did, and that was 4 years ago. So I got the bug, and I love doing it, and it's a passion for sure. I just love doing it.
So what happens when you have, kind of like in sports, you have a bad game or a bad day? What about those nights where
Happens.
just no one's laughing and no one's like just picking up on your jokes?
Yeah, it's funny because it's like football. Whereas you go out, and just because you're Chris Flynn, you're a good football player, doesn't mean you're going to have a good day. It doesn't mean you're going to
might throw 3 pickoffs.
You might get knocked out, right?
Yeah.
Everything is unique to the situation. You're going to go up. It could be the same jokes, but it's a different,
They're just not.
Different room, different group of people. Things are going on in their lives. You have to find a way to sort of to plug into what's happening in the room and take them on the ride with you. And that's why it's exciting. That's why every night you can be saying the same jokes, but they might not be working in the same way because it's just a different
Or you're
dynamic.
just not saying it maybe the same way.
So many different variables, and that's the game, right? That's
Wow.
figuring it out and watching other people, right?
Yeah.
Figuring out what they're
Watching
doing.
game tape,
which
That's
is
amazing.
Yeah, which is another thing that's super interesting about you is on Facebook you put out so much video of stuff in the past, like, so you must have all this video, know how to do that, right? Like, was that
Yeah, I
part
like
of your
putting old
game?
clips. Yeah, my parents used to record all our games, and for St. Mary's, I'll mention more thing about St. Mary's. Like, back then, a lot of people, like, my name was pretty popular back then, even though it was just at university level.
Yeah.
And the reason it was there was one reason, because in 1988, my second year, when St. Mary's got pretty strong, that's when TSN became regular cable.
Yeah.
And there was no Sportsnet, it was just TSN, and there was not as many channels, but everyone was watching TSN. And for some reason, one of the first things TSN decided to do or focus on was Canadian university football. Mm-hmm. So we were on TSN because we were always ranked one or two during 88, 89, 90 when TSN first came out. We had 2 or 3 or 4 games a year. Our playoffs were all on TSN. When SportsCenter comes on nowadays, the Canadian University highlights don't even make it.
Yeah.
When I was playing, I swear to God, when SportsCenter came on, they started with our game.
Yep.
Like, they would show the highlights of our game. Play of the night would be probably a play from our game. Like,
Yes.
So I'd come home.
That's because your plays lasted 25 seconds, right? Chris Flynn scrambles. He runs.
But I would come home for Christmas, playing way out in Halifax, but I'd come home for Christmas in Buckingham, and everyone had seen all my games because of TSN. So TSN really made, a lot of people knew my name. When coaches would go out recruiting, the kids would mention, oh, Chris Flynn, even though I was out at St. Mary's, and we were like the Halifax Huskies too. There was no pro team there, so we were like and it wasn't just in even the Halifax newspapers, but it wasn't just in Halifax. Like, I was in the Ottawa Citizen and the Montreal Gazette. Like, again, it was because of TSN. We were like a pro team, and not just St. Mary's, but all university football was pretty big back then. So I have a lot of old game tapes and stuff like that. And I forget who taught me how to do it, so I put on clips. Even some of my old teammates for their birthday, I'll say happy birthday, and I'll post a little.
I watch everyone
1-minute clip of their
they're
birthday.
awesome,
so
man.
they're like, and then they'll share it to all their friends. So I like doing stuff like that. Sometimes some old like quick highlight clips, especially like I said, for guys on their birthday and stuff like that.
I can remember the feeling. So we would, you could make a poster for the season, and then it'd be the dates of the games, and then beside it would say TSN, and that game was so special. And I can remember being out on Bishop's, Coulter.
And you guys would play at least once a year on TSN too.
Yeah. And you'd be out there stretching, and they'd have the scaffolding up, and Michael Landsberg and Gordon Miller would be up there, and you could hear their voices, and there's a different feel to it, right? They made it really special to be out there.
And you were on his off the record quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I haven't talked to him the last year or so, but I still kept in touch with him because he was the one that did all our games.
Yes.
He must have did 10 or 12 of my games at least, and Jamie Bone was his
Jamie Bone,
analyst. But Michael Landsberg, he was the guy. So I watched you on his show too, and I watched his show. They stopped doing it a couple of years ago, I guess. But
it was it was the most successful Canadian talk show for a decade. It was.
Why did it?
I have no idea. Just I think ESPN bought TSN, something to do with corporate stuff, right? And then they just changed the format. And I don't know. He still does, dog shows
Other stuff,
or something.
yeah.
I don't know.
But it's like my favorite show is PTI. That's been going on for 17, 18 years. But eventually, they changed. They want to do something different.
What's PTI?
PTI is Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon on ESPN. It's just they talk about.
Oh, they go back and forth about topics.
That's it. Yeah, so I like watching that. Off the Record wasn't quite like that, but it was around for quite a while.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah,
it used to be when it first started. There'd be it was sort of he'd be in his chair and there'd be 3 guys beside him, and then it turned into sort of a square where there was 4. And I was on the first show where they experimented with that because it was me and Mark Stepnowski, a good friend of mine, were in town, and there's 2 other guests already booked. One was a Bare Naked Ladies drummer, and another was a pitcher for the Toronto Blue Jays. And so it's like, well, we want to have the 4 of you on, and so the format for the whole changed, where he would sit sort of at the top of it, and then there would be 2 chairs and then 2 chairs, and then they went with that for the next 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
My old high school buddy Richard Gardner, he was on that a few times too.
So you were never on that show?
No, I never was. If he didn't ask me, and if I would have asked him, he would have said yes. But for some reason, I just I don't know.
Yeah. I believe I asked him about 15 times before I got on, and then I sort of figured out the format about how he wants you to do it. So anytime they needed I guess they'd call me every 3 months, which was awesome. I'd make the drive down there, make a day of it. It was a great experience.
Yeah, I should have asked him to go on it one time just for the fun of it, but I enjoyed watching it. That's for sure.
I want to get him on this podcast too, for sure.
Yeah, he's good.
He's awesome.
Yeah, he's good.
He's got a great story, and I'd like to catch up with him too. He's a great guy. Helped out so many people.
For sure. Yeah, he has. Yeah.
So we went from what's the story about you saving someone's life?
Okay, so after the
I remember that in the newspaper. I remember Chris Flynn, you were in Europe or something.
So after Montreal Machine, 2 years with the Machine, and ended in the spring of '92, I went right to the Ottawa Rough Riders like 2 weeks after the Montreal Machine Spring League ended. Training camp started in the CFL, so I finally went to the Ottawa Rough Riders, my boyhood team, and they I won't go too long with it, but they actually had me trying out 2 different positions. I tried out receiver in the morning during training camp 2 days, receiver in the morning, and then quarterback in the afternoon. I did really good at receiver, quarterback. I was supposed to get in the exhibition games. I got in for 3 plays. They cut me. They wanted me to come back and be on the practice roster. And at that time, I just was backing up with the Montreal Machine for 2 years. I was tired of sitting on the bench. So I played 1 year with the Ottawa Bootleggers, which was a lot of fun, semi-pro team, like not practicing. We couldn't even afford to pay for the lights at the end of the season. So we just played games. We weren't even practicing and playing against American teams. So I absolutely love that. So I did that for just 1 season.
Did you win the whole thing that year?
No. We actually, I won offensive player of the league, and we lost to Syracuse in the semifinal. Okay. But again, we did the whole last month without even practicing. It was like a touch football.
Sounds
team.
Great.
I know, I loved it. Like you, I love football, but the one thing was too many practices and not enough games.
Yes.
That's what's good about hockey. They practice a little bit.
That's right.
And they play all the time.
A lot of games.
So to answer your question finally about the woman in France, so in this January '93, I got approached to go play football in France. I was like, do they play football in France? I didn't even know that in Europe. And I was like, okay, it was in a little town called Croissy-sur-Seine, just outside of Paris. This beautiful, very old town. Like the church was like 13th century, right across from where I live. Like it was a beautiful spot. And so I went there as a player coach. The players are all from France, but there's 3 imports per team, usually American, but some teams have Canadian, especially if it's a player that can speak French. I'm not perfectly bilingual, but I can get by in French. And so I was a player coach there. And it's a bit of a long story, but me and my buddy Matt Nealon, who also came that year to play with me in France.
He was a coach at Bishop's when I was there, by the way.
He was, eh?
Yeah.
Okay.
He ended up winning a Grey Cup with Toronto.
That's right. Yeah, 1992 with Wayne Gretzky and
Right.
Bruce McNall with the owners.
John Candy.
John Candy. So me and Matt were going to Paris that day. We're going on our bikes to go to the train, and we kind of like the Seine River went right through, goes all through France, went right through our town, and this is like in March, I guess. So it's like not 20 below, but it's like it's cold. It's sort of winter time, and so we're going on our bikes, and we see someone down in the water. We thought someone scuba diving or something like that, like in the dirty, cold Seine River. Mm-hmm. And then we noticed they were kind of like waving their arms, whatever. And so we got off our bikes and we had to go down this hill to get down to right on the shoreline. And then we could hear her kind of yelling. And there was people walking, ignoring her. They were just walking up the path. Like no one wanted to get involved. Yeah. So Matt actually had his arm in a sling. He had a separated shoulder. He was out for a couple of games. So we go down, and to be honest, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Watch her floating down the river, yeah, or jump in? Like I got to jump in. So I had those, are those little, maybe you wore one, maybe didn't, those little pouches you used to wear. The fanny pouch. Yeah, I had one of those. So I took that off. I took my leather coat off. I didn't take my shoes off or anything. I jumped in. First thing I did was bang my knee on a rock, so I was swearing about that. So I honestly, I wasn't sure what I was getting into or how dangerous. So it's kind of like the Lièvre River that goes through Buckingham. It's like, I don't know how long it is, like maybe 100 yards or wide, whatever. So I swam out to her. Once I got out to her, I wasn't sure what to do. Like I put my arm around her and I started swimming with one arm. But her head was going under a bit, and her face was all, I remember her face was all white, her lips were all purple, and she could speak English a bit. And she, to backtrack a little bit, she was from this rich family, and she got cut from the choir that morning, or the night before, and that morning she decided to commit suicide. So she went to the bridge and she jumped off. But I guess by the time we saw her, she had changed her mind and she didn't want to die.
Sounds like a Disney movie.
Yeah. So I got out there and I'm trying to swim, not getting anywhere with her. So then I told her to put her arms around me, which I'm told you're not supposed to do because they can, in desperation, pull you down too. But once I had my two arms going, and if I had to do that today, it'd be I'm not. I've been playing touch football the last few years, but this fall I didn't play. So I'm a little out of shape.
Yeah, you might float a little better.
But back then I was in good shape, so she's lucky I was in good shape. So I started swimming. Once I had both my arms, I was able to swim to shore, and we got out of the water. And then the first couple of houses we got to, I swear to God, they were like closing their curtains. They wouldn't let it because we were all like wet and muddy. I finally got to a house that let us in their house, and the fire department came and the police came, and it was a big deal. Like they ended up, the newspapers from Paris all across Canada were contacting me, the radios. It ended up being a big deal. They did a ceremony with the ambassador of Canada in France. I got the Medal of Honor for bravery. Like it was kind of embarrassing because I didn't think it was a big deal. I truly didn't feel like my life was ever in danger, although I wasn't. If I wouldn't have been in good shape, it might have been a little rougher. But I met her afterwards. A few weeks later, she had a black dress on and a big cross. That's what she was wearing, like a nun kind of. She wasn't a nun, but she was probably, I don't know, 20 years old. I never saw her again after that, but she didn't say much. And I even met her parents. It was like a really awkward date because she had, initially tried to commit suicide. Yeah. So it was a very awkward meeting with her family and everything. But it made news all across Canada. It was a big deal, and it was, like I said, it was kind of embarrassing. But they did a huge ceremony for me.
Oh, you saved her life.
I guess, yeah.
maybe your whole life was about pointing in that direction, just to be there on that day. In your skimpy little shorts, I don't know, maybe.
No, I wasn't. Like I said, it was probably like November weather here.
It was cold, yeah.
It was cold, but not. It was probably like say around zero, but it wasn't 20 below. Life. But and she had like this big black coat on, and she was cold. Like I said, she was skinny, and I remember her said her face and her lips were all purple. So she was having a hard time. She couldn't swim. The current was taking her down the river.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to, whatever, swim better than she was able to. But so that was my France. And I ended up playing and coaching in France for a few years.
Okay.
And I played safety. It's funny, I don't know, as a quarterback, playing receiver and safety, just from playing quarterback,
Yep.
I was surprised how I was naturally good at those positions. Like at safety, I was like, wow, I could read the quarterbacks and picking those American quarterbacks off in France. I said the imports were usually American. And so I played a little bit of defense. So in 1996, I'm turning 30 years old. This is really the end of my football career.
Yep.
And the Ottawa Rough Riders, their starting quarterback and their safety got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like 3-13. They probably didn't have much money either.
Was that Damon Allen?
No, it was David Archer.
David Archer.
Yeah.
Wow.
1996.
Yeah.
So I went in. They signed me up to save money too, to back up at quarterback and back up at safety. And I'd held for field goals, but I never played special teams before. Mm-hmm. But I actually played special teams. I actually did pretty well. I only played, I think it was like 3 or 4 or 5 games at the end of the season. But the coaches were like, at the end of the season, he was like, wow, you're pretty good. Like I was even picking off the quarterbacks in practice with the Rough Riders. It was just from my quarterback days.
Of course, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so at the end of the season, he goes, you're pretty good. We'd like to have you back next year. And I said, yeah, okay, I think I'll come back. And then a week later, the Ottawa Rough Riders folded. And
it's crazy.
And so, but even though it was a few games, I'll never forget that because, so this was November 96, but in November 1976, I said I want to play for the Ottawa Rough Riders. That was my dream. So even though it was only for a few games and on special teams and backing up, I did get to enjoy that moment of playing for the Ottawa Rough Riders. 20 years to the month. Not exactly like your story was even more amazing, but 20 years to the month, I did get to play for the Ottawa Rough Riders, and that was, I'll never forget that. And I'll just mention, like you mentioned about, 3 Hec Crichtons and all that stuff. People ask me, well, what happened with the CFL? How come you didn't play more? And like you said, there's a few positions. I didn't know that as a kid, but it's mostly Americans playing, especially at quarterback, and you'll have a Canadian at O-line, 1 or 2 at receiver, fullback, 1 D lineman, the free safety, right?
That's right.
And but at quarterback, I don't know, I think I'm humble or whatever, don't brag, but if you needed to have 7 or 8 attributes to play quarterback, I felt I had all of them but one, and the ones I had, like physical and mental toughness, leadership, competitiveness. I'm humble off the field, but I'm an extremely competitive guy on the field. My play calling ability, all my coaches let me call my plays because I was just good at it. Like Tony Adana, David Fisher, Larry Utek, they all let me call my plays. I had really good touch on my passes. I could drop the ball in there. Scrambling ability, of course. All the attributes you need that I see in people you need. I was just missing one, and it was a physical thing. I just did not have those quarterback hands. And if you're watching Kurt Warner or Troy Aikman on TV, they have like gigantic hands. And I remember going into pro camps, people who would notice that would be other quarterbacks. They'd be like, "Whoa, Flynn, how could you throw with hands that small?" And I'd be like, "Just barely." And nowadays, the NFL footballs are broken in. They're dark brown. That was Peyton Manning that started that. They let them break the ball in now. And I could relate to Deflategate with Tom Brady because I always wanted to try to take a little bit of air out of the ball. And if the ball was older or broken in, I could throw it like just barely. But if it was a brand new, remember those big fat J5Vs
were enormous back then.
And they didn't break them in. So right out of the box, right out of the plastic bag, all slick. And if you gave me one of those, I had a hard time with those. I was known for my wobbly passes. Right. And those NFL balls they use today, I could probably actually, and those composite leather ones that you can get today, I can actually throw spirals with those. But with those J5Vs, I had trouble with those. So when I went to a pro camp, I'd get into practice, throw a bunch of wobbly passes, and they'd be like, okay, yeah, you're going to receiver or you're going to safety. So I never really got into the games. I would have, like in 1992 training camp, I wish I could have got in and thrown 5 pickoffs. At least I would have said, okay, well, I got my chance. But I never really got into the games at quarterback to really show that I couldn't do it. They always put me at other positions. So that's my regret. But as I said, I did have that one thing that I was lacking is quarterback hands. Apparently, when they draft quarterbacks, you got been to those combines. I noticed you got.
Yeah, they measure your hands for sure. I have unusually long.
Yeah, you do.
Between there, yeah.
They do all those measurements, and for quarterbacks, they look for hands that are at least 9 inches long. Mine are barely 7. So,
adorable.
Well, in normal life, they're kind of regular hands, but for quarterbacks, they're. And it's for fumbling too, right? It's for ball protection, so that's why they look for guys that have. So that was the one thing. If I have an excuse or whatever, that was one thing that held me back. There was nothing I could do about it, but I did as well as I could with what God gave me. And you asked me why I had all of those other attributes, and I had a passion for football. Like I love football. It's all I cared about in high school. I was like the star quarterback of the football team, but yet when I went to team parties or school parties, I was actually kind of like a nerd. I felt out of place because I didn't drink, I didn't party. I might pretend I was drinking, like some of the people would do. I might pretend I'm getting drunk, but I didn't really drink. Even at Champlain and Lennoxville, I didn't even really party during those days either. It wasn't until I got to university in Halifax, like when I was in my 20s, that I really started to party. But otherwise, when I was a teenager, I was so dedicated to football. That's all I cared about. I used to train and, as my brothers would say, throw the football through the tires and stuff like that. And my mom and dad, I haven't mentioned them today, but they were unbelievable, great supporters, whether it was in high school, an hour away, or Champlain, 4 hours away, or Halifax, 14 hours away. My parents went to almost all my games.
Is that what it took you to get to high school? An hour from Buckingham to
on the school bus? It was an hour. By car, like driving straight there, maybe 30 or 40 minutes. By school bus, it was an hour from Buckingham to Filman Wright and Hull by bus.
Yeah.
So and they went to all my games. They went to all our games when we were kids. All of my brothers and sisters when we were playing sports. But as my football career continued, my parents went. They were at Champlain. They were at St. Mary's. They were great supporters of me all the way through. And people ask about, or you see the kids today. Sometimes the parents almost push them a little bit too much to play. But the child itself, or himself or herself, has to have that passion to play. And I know from listening, like I said, I feel like we've known each other just from. We have a lot of mutual friends too, and I know a little bit about your path, and you obviously had that passion, right? There's no way you can work that hard and train and get to that point of making the NFL unless you really wanted it. It can't be your parents wanting it.
That's right.
It has to be you.
That's right.
And that's the passion I had too, and that's what I would say to anyone. You have to really want it, and you have to work for it, and you have to avoid the partying and stuff like that too if you want to get to where you are.
Goosebumps again, man. That was amazing. That was one more question. Nate, is he gonna play football?
I don't know. Like even hockey, like people ask me about hockey. My sister Judy, you got to get him into hockey. He's not 4 yet. He's 4 next month.
Yep.
But even hockey is such a huge commitment.
It's tough.
Yeah, and so I don't know if he plays. I worry, of course, about the concussions and all that stuff too. If he decides to play whatever sport, I'm going to support him 100%. But I'm definitely against the playing one sport 12 months a year thing. It's the coaches too that push for that. Oh, if he doesn't play in the off-season hockey program, he'll be behind the others. But then when September comes around, he's totally burnt out from hockey. Yeah. So whatever he decides to do, I'm not going to push him. I'll support him, and I'm definitely not going to allow anyone to push him to play it, 12 months a year. But it's not stuff I have to worry about just yet. He's not even 4 yet, but I just want to get him out on the rink soon, and he probably just gonna. I got him these Spider-Man skates.
Yeah.
They're adjustable, and he just kind of walks around in them.
Yeah.
Last year he was just walking. This year he might be able to actually skate a bit. So,
Yeah.
My son Nate, his birthday's January 8th. He'll be 4, and he keeps
he's a
me.
January baby. You gotta give him hockey.
he keeps me. He keeps me young and keeps me. Keeps me going, and it's fun, and he's. I'll get him out on the skates there. Some outdoor rink. They're already open, some of the outdoor rinks. So
Yes.
I'll get him out there soon.
Well, I hope he plays football. I'm looking forward to that. And, on behalf of a generation that you inspired to play football, man, thank you very much. And before this, I was a huge fan, even bigger fan now. That was
Thanks.
awesome.
Well, thanks for having me on, Mike.
Man,
Appreciate it.
I really like that. That was great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
We'll turn all this off, take a picture.